Hey there, and welcome to the first video on Hinduism per se. This is going to be the first of the four core Asian philosophies we're going to study, which is Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. And we'll study some variations of them from different regions and how they developed over time. But starting with Hinduism, what I'd like to do, and what I'll do in some of these lectures, is I'd like to lay down really the core concepts of this religion that drive the whole religion. It would be like if I were teaching a class in Christianity, I would talk about the cross and Jesus' life and things like that, right? And the Ten Commandments and the core principles. And so that's what I'll do now. And in particular, I'm going to talk about this concept of Brahman-Atman, which is sometimes translated as God, but as I go through the course of this lecture, I hope you'll understand why that's not the best translation. And along those lines, let me just start there with the difference between many of these Asian philosophies we're looking at and the way we understand metaphysical ideas in the West. Remember from the first video, metaphysics means reality or what exists, existence. So when I refer to metaphysics, I'm referring to what they believe exists. So the difference between the East and the West is sometimes referred to in terms of the difference between dualism and non-dualism. So dualism, dual meaning two, like there's two things, there's two substances, there's two ideas. In the Western world, in Western religions, there's a concept of dualism, which is that you can see it in terms of good versus evil, right? You can see it in terms of God is a separate being that created us versus the universe that he created, that he may interact with, but he's not identical with the universe. So there's sort of a dual nature to metaphysics in the Western world and Christianity and Islam and Judaism, sometimes called the Judeo-Christian faiths. Whereas in the East, and it's really important to understand this to get the most out of this class, in the East, God or the higher power is usually described more in as non-dualism, non-dualistic. There isn't a division between things. God is one. God is all. God is the whole universe. And sometimes this idea is referred to as pantheism. Pan meaning all, theism deriving from the word theos, which in Spanish is Dios. That's where that comes from. God. God is in everything. Pantheism. In the West, what I just described in Christianity and the Judeo-Christian religions is monotheism, singular God who created the universe. Right? So that's a big difference that we're going to have to see and appreciate to really get the most out of these Asian philosophies. Non-dualism. So case in point, this very concept I'm trying to teach you in this video of the Brahman-Atman, let's start with the Brahman part. That is often translated as God or the one or the higher being or higher force. Again, to just think of it as God, it's going to evoke in Western thinkers and people like ourselves this idea of a separate being. But that's really not what they mean. They mean God as in, another way it's sometimes put is that the Brahman is the source from which everything comes and the source into which everything will go. Right? This is what you came out of when you were born. It's where you will go when you die. It's all and everything. Everything is Brahman. The things we see around us are just manifestations of Brahman. Right? This paper I'm holding with a couple notes, this microphone in front of me, myself, my own body, my shirt, you, the camera, all of you listening to this. Right? Those are all manifestations of Brahman. So Brahman starts off, gives life to the universe, so to speak, and sustains it, and will be there when it's gone. Right? It's everything. The universe is just a manifestation of Brahman, and that's really the difference that you have to see to understand Eastern thought in general, especially Eastern metaphysics, like we're talking about here. Now, Brahman itself is a word that derives from a Sanskrit word that means to grow. Right? So another way to think about it is the growth of the universe. One metaphor I've heard from a mentor of mine is it's kind of like a spider, a spider's web. The web kind of emanates from the spider. Right? Now that's just a metaphor, but think of the universe emanating from the spider is like Brahman, and the web is emanating from the sort of spider of the universe, if you will. Not the sexiest metaphor, but it gets the point across of this idea of growth, and the universe is expanding, and we're all these manifestations of Brahman. And so right away, I think some of you might be thinking, and I know I was thinking when I first saw this, is, well, a lot of this seems to be referring to an experience or ideas or some sort of reality that's really fundamentally beyond words, right? We can't really put it into words. I mean, I can't go and point you and say, this is Brahman, right? When people of the Vedanta tradition, which you'll see as you read what that word means, Vedanta is often a more specific way to refer to the Hindu tradition. If you read the first chapter, you'll notice that the Hindus, the idea of Hinduism was actually just referred to the name of a river based on some colonizers who came in. It's not what they call themselves. So I'll typically refer to Vedanta, but Hinduism is a useful way just because everybody uses the term, so I'll sometimes use it. But anyways, in the Vedanta tradition, they acknowledge that words are useful and can be helpful, but they don't fully describe what that higher level of reality is. They don't, you can't really do like I said, you can't do anything to get at it. So you have to experience it, and you have to use words as a map. Right? So I think the wrong conclusion to draw is to say, oh, it's meaningless and silly because we're talking about something that can never be fully proven with science. Something that can't fully be argued rationally. Of course, even though the most scientific among you, I hope you would acknowledge that there are things in this world that are beyond science. And it's not just Hinduism, it's not just the Vedanta tradition that does this. And in Christianity, if you believe in God, can you fully put him into words? Can you point to where he exists? Don't you still believe he exists, right? Words are a road or a map to help us get into those areas. What's interesting is that the words themselves are a manifestation of Brahman from the Vedanta tradition, right? If you put on those glasses of Vedanta, that's the way they see words, everything, right? Everything I'm saying, all our thought, all our rational thought is itself a manifestation of Brahman. But those words can be used to unlock the God that is within us. So let me now that I said that, let me now turn to Atman, the other part of Brahman. So again, we're stuck with the problem of, we have a concept in the West we call the soul that is sometimes translated for Atman, but that's really not what it means. And again, it goes back to that dualism versus non-dualism distinction. Because in the Western world, the idea of a soul is like everybody has their own personal soul. And the concept of body and soul, body-mind, right, is a type of dualism where there's these different natures to the soul versus a different nature to the body. But the concept of the soul, Atman, in the Vedanta tradition is really still just Brahman. Right? It's still just Brahman. Brahman is everything. The Atman is just a practical way of referring to the Brahman within us. We have a soul or godlike entity within us. But the difference with the West is that the Atman soul is a universal soul that is shared by all, right? It's shared by everything. And it goes back to everything I was saying about the one, the Brahman. So again, the Atman is Brahman. And I know it gets a little confusing, but the Atman is there to remind us that you have the Brahman within you. The Brahman is within you. And really this is the core of the Vedanta tradition, of the Hindu tradition, if you will, is that we are born into this world and we forget that we are Brahman. We forget that we are God. Right? So another way of describing this whole situation is that really the universe is just God experiencing himself or itself or herself, or whatever pronoun you prefer. Right? The universe is just God experiencing himself. However, as we'll talk about it in the next video, we'll talk about this concept of Maya. Humans are born into a situation where they're asleep. They don't remember. We don't remember that we're truly Brahman. We don't remember that we can access the Atman within us and connect back to the ocean of life that is Brahman, that is everything, to the spider's web of the universe, if you will, going back to that metaphor. And that's really the problem. Now you'll notice that this is, again, to make another analogy to the West, think about the Garden of Eden. In many religions, there's this idea that there was this lost knowledge, right? We had it all. We had a connection to everything. We knew God. We were living in God's world, and we screwed it up, and we left the Garden of Eden, and now we're fallen, sinful creatures, right? That's according to the more Judeo-Christian tradition. But the way that plays out in the Vedanta tradition is that we have simply forgotten who we are, right? I can't remember if I used the term yet, but it's like many people say it's like sleepwalking, right? It's like going through life as though you're living a dream, and you've forgotten your true nature, and you're suffering, and you're depressed, and all these bad things happen, all the things that we know about life. And then you realize, you wake up. It's like waking up from a dream, and you say, holy shit, I'm everything, right? I really am this deeper connection to all things. All of this, of course, is if you buy into the Vedanta tradition. And every time I lecture on these ideas, I'll do my best to get into the headspace of the perspective of somebody who believes these traditions. One of my absolute favorite metaphors, and you'll see that I'm going to put a picture of it in the module, is the concept of an ocean and waves, as understanding the difference between Brahman and Atman. So the Brahman is the ocean, right? It's this vast ocean of life, and it contains everything, right? It's the ocean of all things, all the universe. It's just a metaphor, so bear with me here. Everything is like, the whole universe is like the ocean. We are like the waves going on that ocean. The waves are the Atman. The problem is that we don't remember that we're the Atman, and we identify just with our own little separate waves, right? We think we're just this wave and that wave and this wave. We don't realize we are actually fundamentally the entire ocean. We are all Brahman, right? Let alone do we remember that there's an Atman within us, a wave within us that can help us connect to that greater ocean. And so as we move on in this philosophy, and you'll see this goes into Buddhism as well, meditation and yoga and body work, not yoga typically in the way that it's done today, although there's a connection, but mainly yoga has a different meaning and different purpose in Vedanta. But anyways, yoga and meditation are the ways that we remind ourselves of our true nature. Those are the ways that we connect back to that ocean. Now, the other thing that comes up here is that, let's just say for the sake of argument, that you do realize that you're Brahman. Now, it's a bit of a demotion, isn't it, to realize that you're Brahman, but then you have to go clock into work at McDonald's or Target or wherever you work and deal with people that, are being rude to you, or deal with your own individual human needs and problems. It seems like a bit of a demotion, because it's like, wait, you're telling me I'm God, but here I am in traffic and somebody's yelling at me, after they cut me off, right? It can cause a lot of issues, our everyday existence. And so the idea is, first of all, to remember if we try on the perspective of the Vedanta tradition, all of that is a manifestation, a play of Brahma, right? All of that is the universe playing and experiencing itself, right? So for you to get so connected with your own individual reality and your own individual problems and suffering means you've fundamentally forgotten that you are Brahman, right? And the second point I'd make there is that from the perspective of a Vedantic person who practices this, they don't care about all that small stuff, all the traffic and the job and the clocking in. That's really, once you really realize your true nature, that becomes so unimportant, right? And in fact, you can actually engage in those kinds of things with a deeper sense of, because it's not real, it's a game, and that truly you're deeply this higher level Brahman, that you really are not a Brahman, but Brahman, because there's a term, a Brahman, in Hinduism that we'll talk about later. But anyways, that's kind of the ocean metaphor. I think it really helped me understand it. Now, another metaphor to think about this is the peeling back of an onion. Right? The peeling back of an onion. Because one of the things that happens is that and this we'll get into the next video on Maya, which is kind of like the veil of illusion around us. We grow up and we get all these different layers that are put onto us, again, metaphorically like an onion. We have a personality type, and we have our likes and dislikes, and we have our friendships and our personality traits and our desires and things like that, and what we want and what we don't want. And all of this gets built up into sort of a metaphorical onion where we have all these layers of crap around the deep true nature that we are. And so, because you might wonder right away, like, well, why can't we just, if we're all God, why is it so hard to realize it? Well, it's just because of the nature of the way that Brahman unfolds. Right? It's not anybody's fault. It's just that that's the way it unfolds. And so in order to realize the Atman within you and to peel back that inner layer, all those layers to get to the core that is Brahman, it takes some work. Right? It's going to take a lot of work. And like I said, a lot of the Hindu tradition, the Vedanta tradition, is devoted to peeling back that onion. It's funny, I once used that metaphor of an onion in class when I was talking about a similar concept in Buddhism that we'll talk about later. And one of my students said, oh, that's just like Shrek. And he kind of put me to shame. And I've seen Shrek, and if any of you, I'm guessing many of you have seen kind of a classic movie, Shrek. It's old now. But in the movie, there's a part where one of the characters talks about peeling back the onion of his personality, and really beneath it, there's this beautiful personality that nobody sees. Although even that metaphor isn't really what the Hindus are saying here, because they're saying that not only are you peeling it back to your personality, you're peeling back that other thing that you just peeled back. You're peeling back everything to where the onion doesn't exist anymore, and you just re-emerge into the ocean, right? And again, I go back to that metaphor of the ocean. So one last thing I'd add here is there's sometimes a deeper term that we use to describe in philosophy what what Hindus, what the Vedanta tradition is saying. Pantheism works, and it is used. It definitely fits pantheism. But there's another term called panentheism. It adds a little en, so panentheism, which is really a more specific way to talk about what the Vedanta tradition is saying. Because pantheism is really referring to Brahman. Brahman is everything. And again, that's not wrong, but it's not as specific as could be. Because panentheism says the Atman too. Panentheism says everything's Brahman, but there's also this spark of love and joy within you that is this higher experience of reality, this higher experience of the Brahman called Atman, right? It's the universal soul within you. Again, the concept of soul doesn't really fully characterize it. But panentheism means God is with it. Just to put it simply, pantheism means God is everything. Panentheism means God is everything, but he's also within you. And again, I'm using the term God in a more broad sense that does not refer necessarily to the Western concept of God. That said, I would like to end this video here with a reference to the Bible, because like I said, I'll do that when I can to help everyone take on board these ideas and see that there's connections into the Western tradition that we're a part of. So from the Gospel of John, and forgive me, I can't remember the exact verse, and I can't remember the exact quote, but this is basically what happens. It's, those first 4 books of the New Testament that are told from different perspectives, and one's from John's perspective. And Jesus is just talking about, has just healed, not just talking about, he has just healed a number of people, right? He's solved people's sicknesses, and he's brought them back to life and so forth. He's healed people. And after he does all this healing, some of the people there ask him, they say, Jesus, thank you so much. That's so amazing. How did you do it? How did you heal us? And then Jesus says a great thing. He says, I'm not the one who did these actions, but the Father in me who does these works. It's not me who did these actions, but the Father in me who did those works. And I know it's not the same religion, but it's interesting that that is sort of what Vedantic people from the Vedantic tradition, Hindus, are talking about. It's a similar thing. They don't act per se when they find that Brahman, the Atman within them, and realize that they are Brahman, right? It sort of acts through them. They become a vessel for it. And then they can more realize and be able to deal with the problems of the everyday world. The depression that many of us face, the difficult people, the difficulty of having empathy for people who hate you, right? The hatred, the destruction, the war, let's just be honest, the rape, the terrible things that happen, right? All of that stuff can be put into a different kind of context when you realize that all of it is this manifestation of this higher force of Brahman. Okay, so anyways, I'll stop there. I mentioned a couple times here the concept of Maya, the veil of illusion, and in the next lecture, I'll take that one up.